boys, we are back with another Last of Us Part 2 leak/discussion video. Today it's gonna be a different one because we're not talking about the ending or Abby or anything like that, because we are going for a full on board every leak that is confirmed and that is speculated but close to confirm for The Last of Us Part 2, and we're not gonna waste any time. So Musa, if you're watching this, no gameplay footage, no audio, no screenshots, no chance of striking this video down. The people deserve to know the truth. So without wasting any more time, let us begin. Okay, on Reddit, the user by the name of Flaming Brand has actually posted a really long thread, and it is actually a really great thread. I'll post a link in description. Shout out to them. They posted this spoilers breakdown. Here's where we are at so far with The Last of Us Part 2. So they've combined every leak possible and everything we've known that makes sense and that is speculated. So if you don't want to get spoiled, because there's going to be some mild spoilers in here somewhere, we're going to discuss those. But no, we're not going to share any gameplay because we don't want to get copy striked or anything like that. Anyways, and before I begin, I know all the people compare me with Leafy. I don't know how you find my voice comparable to Leafy, but you know what? I'll take that as a compliment. Here it goes. The leaks, what we know and what we think we know. So there is a lot of confusion about the leaks. Most people seem to think that we just have one solid block of confirmed leak information about the game. Well, that's not really the case. What we have so far are the three main sources. The leveled list. Yes, I am making its own separate source because while it could be bundled with the cutscenes and gameplay, it does something very different as it lays down the structure of the entire game. You could say this is the foundation we use to place the rest of the information we have. It's also the one piece of information that led to the idea that we play half the game as Abby, which is the center of the whole controversy surrounding the game's story. We'll touch on that later. Let's keep on going. The leaked footage. This speaks for itself. This is a bundle of unordered cutscenes. You already know what I'm talking about. Compare, match all of them. It's 3 hours gameplay footage and other testing optimizing that was leaked from Naughty Dog. This is the truest information we have, as it is direct footage from the game and there are very little chances that the content will be altered massively, but what we saw and what will be in the final release, though it is not entirely to be excluded between what we saw and what will be in the final release, because we've seen the story trailer has changed some assets. The main struggle with this footage has been to make sense of it all, as it is again unordered. We've been mostly trying to figure out what fits where so we can then make an educated guess as to what the characters are talking about and deduce details about the plot. This means that the same footage can lead to multiple interpretations, as it has happened with the leaks. You can see a lot of people either saying the same stuff or doing a different interpretation of the same story. Number 3, leaked summary or outlines. These are alleged full summaries of the plot of the game from people who claim to have played or worked on the game or know someone who has. These leaks often contradict each other and sometimes themselves, as some of the information they shared has been proven wrong, which in this context means specifically that it seems to clash with inferences that we can make from the leaked footage. There are of course no certainties. All of these can be cross-referenced with the leaked footage to try to establish their validity, though of course some of it having come out after the said footage, they do tend to use already confirmed information to weave their narrative, which I've been saying in the last leak because it wasn't that good, but we'll usually get some details wrong. We've had 4 main leaks available with other source adding bits and pieces of information, but the third one, actually the second one that I did, is actually closest to what we can believe as a leak, or close to it. Number 1, the first Reddit leak. From a month ago, this one claims that he read a comment from a YouTube video of an early leaked gameplay footage claiming that Ellie and Joel both die at the end, with Joel dying near the beginning and Ellie dying at the end by the hands of Abby, which you play for the half the game. It also claims that both Jesse and Dana live, which we know to be untrue, as Jesse dies in Seattle. There is an off chance he's only presumed dead and turns up later, but this is unlikely. This leak can be found on the Reset Era. I talked about the Reset Era in the first ever leak video I've ever did. Spoiler thread under the unconfirmed speculation section. That is incorrect. Number 2, the 4chan summary. This is the main leak we've had so far and where people mostly get the information from. This one supposedly came after the first round of footage was leaked and claims that the second half of the game is played entirely as Abby, leading to a fight with Ellie in which Ellie dies, and the game supposedly ends with the loose implication that Ellie's friends will now hunt the Abby in return. Although I believe this is the stupidest one, it could be true considering all the leaks we've seen so far. Continuing the cycle of of revenge that it is said to be the central theme. This leak seems at least partially untrue, considering it places Jess's death before Joel's, which conflicts with what we've guessed so far, and the supposed death of Ellie seems to be inferred from misinterpreted information on the leaker's part about the cutscene in which Abby and Ellie fight, which was harder to find at the time than it is now, in which case the information is untrue, as we know from the footage that Ellie survives the fight, and we can infer that she is present in the very next level from what we know. I believe the smashing button in that fight scene, they switched the scene. You can see a shadow showing you actually that the scene is transitioning from Abby to Ellie, so I believe the smashing button is not Abby, rather it is Ellie trying to survive the choke, but that is just me. Number 3, the newer leak. This one comes from home folks, as it is originated in this very subreddit titled New Plot Leaks. Most of you have heard this false. This is the second time I did that, so this leak comes from someone who allegedly played The Last of Us 2 and contradicts the previous leaks in a few places, as well as giving additional claims, notably that Ellie does survive the ending, that we do take back control of her, that Abby dies at the hands of Ellie, and that particular Firefly character makes an unexpected appearance, as well as clarifying the Seraphite's role in the story. While this particular leak has not been found to go against any of the available footage, this could be explained with us having now far better access to far more of it, leaving less room and more time to craft a credible story, and speaks of details that were left untouched by previous leaks but do line up with what we know. The consensus seems to be that the leaker is untrustworthy and acting on behalf of Naughty Dog, or as a fanboy, trying to improve opinion on the game by weaving a less controversial version of events. I do believe that. I do believe some people are doing it, but you know, it is what it is. Mistakes in a couple of characters' names, seemingly typos, have been cited as a source of distrust, along with the previous lack of details regarding certain plot points and the leaker's affiliation to Naughty Dog. Now, there are some people who does it right, but the more specific details that aligns with the story, the more you could say, oh, I could see that happening. But anyways, number 4, the newest leak. A new source has emerged shortly after writing this breakdown, this once again originating here, titled Full Plot of The Last of Us 2. I've actually covered that twice now. This new leak comes from a user who claims to have received the information from a third party, whose username he kindly gives, and goes much more in detail about the full events of the plot. It still matches everything we've known so far, with adding many new details, making a relatively credible source. See, everybody agrees. Now here's the important part. Most of this information has been compiled and showcased on threads and message boards, the most notable being Reset Era's The Last of Us Part 2 spoiler thread. They're still actually updating. I've actually checked it right now. This has led to some confusion as people have looked at this collection of information with various degrees of truths as one whole, taking the whole thing as confirmed facts about the game, or whether consciously or not, using the unconfirmed leaks to interpret the footage, even though some of it is blatantly untrue. An example would be people deducing Ellie's death from her fight with Abby. The biggest culprit and the center of the whole controversy regarding The Last of Us Part 2 is Abby's role in the game. Even the confirmed section of the Recent Era states you play the first half of the game as Ellie and the second half as Abby, the character featured in the PGW trailer played by Laura Bailey, citing the proof that the leaked level list divides the game's level between Ellie's level and Abby's level if you take a look to the left. This has been mixed with the following points from the completely unconfirmed 4chan summary, where we say she kills Joel herself, Ellie butchers her group, second half of the game is spent as Abby, Ellie continues hunting the cult while you chase her down, ending as Ellie and Abby fighting to the death. It was more of a narration of what we saw in the gameplay footage. Nothing was added and nothing was deduced. It was just meant to explain the story that only leaks have shown. Towards the midpoint of the game, which you've been playing as Ellie so far, you come across Abby as she murders Joel brutally with a golf club. I hope, because I've been thinking about this yesterday, right, that I hope, and I really hope, that they at least show a fight of Joel against Abby and he being struggling, or at least putting in some work before dying. Because if you don't see Joel for a long time and your first impression after a long time is him being on the ground, cut it, Sony, Naughty Dog. The game then shifts perspective, abruptly putting you in the shoes of Abby right after you have witnessed her kill Joel and expecting you to sympathize with her as you spend the rest of the game now hunting Ellie, become the new antagonist, and is presented as the villain. You defeat Ellie at the end and maybe even kill her kid's role. This understandably angered players for obvious reasons. However, if the reliance on the 4chan summary hasn't already published this story into conjecture territory, a further look at the leaked level list used as proof in the confirmed section of the thread further puts doubt into this whole series of events happening as we previously believed. The level list divides the game into 9 chapters: Jackson, Ellie day 1 to 3, Abby day 1 to 3, the farm, and the end. This is supposed, by the way, at first glance from the leaked gameplay that we've had. At first glance, it is easy to see why the consensus is that the game is split down the middle between Ellie and Abby. Obviously, each of them gets 3 chapters or days, so this must just mean that half the game is played as one and half the other, but does it? First of all, Ellie's 3-day are comprised of 12 levels, 5 in day 1, 4 in day 2, and 3 in day 3, while Abby's only have 8, 3 in day 1, only 2 in day 2, and 3 in day 3. This would mean that even by this account, the majority of the game is still spent as Ellie. Doesn't matter, why are we playing as Abby to begin with? I don't even want to play as her for 1 second. What are you expecting from me? Even in the PW trailer, don't tell me you didn't feel that as well. She was being portrayed as a villain. I felt Abby as a villain even back in 2017, so y'all know I am not playing as some villain. Secondly, and most importantly, what about the rest of the chapters? We can strongly infer that the entirety of Jackson chapter is played as Ellie, with the obvious exception of the prologue, Ellie flashback guitar, which we know is played as Joel. This is the only thing everyone can agree on when it comes to the prologue. As for the final 2 chapters, the farm and the end, they are divided into 3 levels. The farm has 1 level called Farm, and end has 2 called Santa Barbara and Epilogue respectively. This actually goes with another 4chan leak that we've actually posted on the channel, the Santa Barbara of game ending in another flashback with Joel, and the Santa Barbara we talked about how Ellie's going to Santa Barbara for that medical center to get the surgery, or is she going for the surgery, or is she going for the revenge? So we've already talked about this. Some of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. Mostly it is just rumors and speculation. We've had information that Dina and Ellie end up trying to raise their child in a farm, with some claiming this would be the ending of the game. Ellie survives, she goes to the farm, Abby wins, the end. I haven't seen a single one who claims this is the ending, so this suggests something that's very important. We take back control of Ellie for the end of the game, and I believe that too. The last part, of course. We don't know much about Santa Barbara or the epilogue. I've talked about it, so you can check that video out. However, out of all the leaks, only the latest one, the newer leak, talks about it. It is also the only one of the leaks that downplays the time spent as Abby, which are we discovering here isn't what it was said to be. This leak states the following: Abby and Lev are in Santa Barbara looking for the remaining fireflies, but Ellie hunts her down and kills her unexpectedly. Now we've seen footage of Abby and Lev looking for fireflies. That is correct, so this seems to be confirmed, which means the final level is played as Abby either fully or in part. The same leak states you control Ellie mostly through the final part of the game, so this would suggest a story trailer, but we're gonna keep on going. This might be true as the rest of the alleged information lines up with what we've been deducing so far, and those deductions go against the grain of everything else that's being said about this game, either by other alleged leakers or during conversations and speculations. To my knowledge, no one else has drawn the conclusions that I'm presenting to you. Shout out to this guy, though of course some people may have and just never shared it, or I've simply missed it. Trust me, they haven't. Actually, there's one more, but not in this detail, so more power to you. Regardless of this last part, there's more speculation than the rest. We can safely say that the size of Abby's role in the game has been somewhat exaggerated, and saying that she is the protagonist for half the game is a huge misguiding oversimplification. I agree with that too, albeit of course unintentionally. Joel most likely dies either during the end of the Jackson chapter, which is very early in the game by the way, or at most during Ellie Day 1 chapter, so the idea that you switch to Abby right after she kills Joel, as originally thought, is also unlikely. Now why is this important? So what if she's played a couple of hours less than Ellie, you could say? Well, this would mostly mean the game isn't trying to spin this as Abby's story. Abby's featured during a few levels towards the end of the game, but the game is still majorly about Ellie. It seems from this to be the Ellie story, not Abby and Ellie's, and certainly not Abby's story. So basically they're saying it is Ellie and Abby's story, but not only Abby's story, it is both of their story. I kind of disagree. If you look at it from a bigger picture, bigger perspective, it looks more like a revenge from someone of fireflies, mainly a NPC doctor that nobody cared about. Anyways, this changes our outlook on the game and the events, and as stated, since most of what we've gathered has a part of interpretation and conjecture, the fact this is now the most likely scenario means the context has been shifted. The new context makes it much more likely for Ellie to survive at the end battle and for her to be the playable character during said fight, therefore leaning towards our second hypothesis that the Santa Barbara chapter, or the chapter where Ellie and Abby have their last fight, which is most likely this one, could be the part of the epilogue, though it is far less likely, is at least partially played as Ellie. It also goes in the direction of the newer leak, giving it more credence. So where does all of this leave us? And before I actually continue this, my whole point before all of this is that before the ending, ending. They should at least take out Abby as much as possible, avoid overexposure before we get to the ending. Hype the ending as much as possible, we play as Ellie, and then we could go back and forth in the ending for Abby and Ellie. That would actually change players' perspective a little bit, but that's just my opinion anyways. Considering what we've been saying so far, it is clear that the idea that we have of the game's story now is very different than the previous consensus. If we mix the facts and footage with some conjecture that we can infer from what we now know, it could resemble more something like this. The prologue starts as Joel recounts the ending of the last game, and we got to see a glimpse of him and Ellie. Fast forward a few years and Ellie's grown up, living a relatively peaceful life in Jackson with best friend Dina and her on and off boyfriend Jesse. Dina and Ellie bond throughout the course of the first chapter in Jackson, developing a relationship, whilst whether they are aware of it or not at this point, Dina is pregnant and with Jesse's baby, so Dina will most likely realize it first but hide it from Ellie until later and use it as a crutch to get her to give up on her quest for revenge. I legit think that this entire thing looks like a fetch quest. I'm sorry. The footage where she stitches up Ellie's arm and is distraught by her eagerness to go look for Abby, I would say comes at a point where she already knows. There's no proof of this particular point, or I feel like this is where she wants to talk about it, but this is just me guessing based on common storytelling practices. Me too, I was just guessing as well. One night that they spend together as Ellie tries to confess to Dina that she is immune, Jesse interrupts them, saying that Tommy hasn't come back for patrol. Ellie and the rest go look for him, and Ellie is joined by Joel. They get separated, and Ellie eventually ends up finding both Joel and Tommy at the hands of Abby and her group, part of the Wolves, which Ellie's group has met before. Joel dies at the hands of Abby, and Ellie's capture has been cut. This is where we get our first flashback to Abby's past, revealing her to be the daughter of the surgeon from the first game. You go through Seattle as Ellie during the 3 days as she crosses the mostly WLF-controlled Seattle and is contested Seraphite territory, seeking their revenge against Abby for Joel's death. Tortured by this, Ellie goes through some flashback and apparently visions of Joel, which you get to experience. Joel dies during the trip at the hands of Seraphites, and so does Abby's boyfriend at the hands of Ellie. I'm looking forward to that. It likely ends on some sort of cliffhanger in a theater as you ambush Abby or are ambushed by her. So theater is actually really important. If you go all the way back to the first era leak where we see a theater and Ellie with guitar, this kind of aligns. Then the game goes back to day one as you play from Abby's perspective. The events of PGW trailer probably come from here. Alternatively, during the 3 days, the game cuts away from Ellie's journey to give us a glimpse into Abby's perspective during this time, going through some of the events she's had to deal with, surviving Seraphites, finding medicine to amputate Yara's arm, as well as their backstory. You reach the aforementioned ambush where you switch once more to Abby and defeat Ellie but spare her and Dina's life at Lev's request. You made a big mistake right there. The game then most likely switches back to Ellie. Some time has passed and she has tried to live a quiet life in a farm with Dina and their child but can't let go of the previous events, especially Joel. We follow Abby in Santa Barbara where she's been searching for the remaining Fireflies, only to apparently get attacked by surprise and stabbed by Ellie. It's likely Ellie meets up with said Fireflies as she wanted answers from them, which again matches with a new leak. You already know, Aaron, Marlene's husband. That came out of nowhere. Now whether or not this makes for a good story, I'll leave for you to decide, but this diverges quite a bit from what we previously thought to be true regarding the second half of the game. Shout out to Flaming Brand, posting everything we've known so far through the leaks and through the 4chan and Reddit leaks as well. It seems like we are learning a bit more about why certain situations has happened, but most importantly, we're still not getting answers as to why Joel died like that. If there is an explanation or some sequence of events that has happened before his death by the hands of Abby, I really hope so. At least we get to play as Joel for one final time. Please, Sony and Naughty Dog, you've already messed up, don't mess up again. Now, are you still getting game day one? Because I am. One free copy for The Last of Us Part 2 from one of you. You already know what to do. Ugh.